introduction. I've come from Norway to share some of the latest technology we have for underwater acoustics. So there's 10 minutes, so I'm going to try to be quick. They might be too quick, so if there are any questions, come see me after the session. Perfect. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to give a very brief introduction about Kongsberg Maritime, which is the company I'm from. I talk about underwater acoustics, what it is, and give a quick history of how it's been developed together with scientific institutions. Can I see it here? And then in the end, I'll go through the current product range, which is basically what I try to do here. So Kongsberg Maritime. Kongsberg, you can find the technology all the way from the satellites all the way down to the deep sea. It's a very diverse company. The common theme is that we try to provide solutions for extreme performance under extreme conditions. So we've seen some of that here today. The company is owned 50% by the Norwegian government, just to mention that. 50% of the turnover comes from the defense industry. Then we have a new part which is called Kongsberg Digital. They're actually looking in how to take the science data also to the cloud, so that's something we're working on. I come from Kongsberg Maritime, which has three main sectors that the company works in. Offshore oil and gas has always been big, maybe not so much anymore. There's been a downturn in that area. Then there's transportation. It's a lot of the revenue comes from that, and then in the end there is the marine part. So fisheries, aquaculture, various kinds of underwater mapping, and we also use the same technology for the naval. So find a fish, find a mammal, find a submarine, it's basically the same thing. So briefly, that was Kongsberg. To those of you who don't know how active acoustics is used, I'll try to explain. It's used for many purposes. What I'll talk about today is mapping the water column. So not do bottom mapping, but mapping the water column. So in the very basic way, you send out the sound and you measure the intensity of the received sound. So you measure the echo. Where did it come from and how strong was it? That's underwater acoustics, basically. And the most normal way to use it is this is an Institute of Marine Research survey, where you map a big area and in the end you come up with the biomass. The total biomass in this area is measured in like a week or 2 weeks cruise. So this is the most common way of using acoustics. It can also be used for plankton. It's even used to map methane seeps. So there are various ways of using it. But basically what you can do is to get a good idea of the ecosystem, the marine ecosystem, over scale. What I show here is just using two frequencies, a low and a high frequency. In the lower frequency, the only thing you see is the bigger targets, which is here it's fish. While when you use the higher frequency, you start to see the smaller objects as well. So all the stuff you see here is plankton. So just by using the two frequencies, you get an idea of how the ecosystem looks. When you add more frequencies, this is an example from Institute of Marine Research, looking at krill. Then you can start to compare the different frequencies from ba 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 and how much backscatter you get from these frequencies. And then you can map that over time, and krill is an animal you can recognize just by using acoustics. Some of the fisheries is more difficult, but there's been a lot of talk about krill here today. I mentioned that this is an example from Woods Hole, where they use the same instrument to map the processes that goes on in the ocean. This is oceanography, it's not fisheries. But they try to find these processes that happens. It could be internal waves, it could be minimum oxygen zones, and you can easily see them in the echo sounder when you have sensitive instrument, as shown here. So that's just another way of using the same technology. History, this is the first publication I could find of biology in the water column. This is from 1935 in Nature, and showing spawning cod. So just as an introduction to the history. Our history in the underwater acoustics started just after the Second World War, where some of the techniques learned during the war, like radio technology, sonar technology, was developed for the private market. And ever since the start, the company has worked together with, for instance, the Norwegian Defense Establishment or the Institute of Marine Research to develop the products. So we work together and we commercialize the products. It's been a very good way of working. So going from radios towards more newer echo sonars and multi-beams. For instance, the example here, this has been going on ever since then. This is 1968. This is a delivery of a vessel with one of the very first computers in Norway. And it was the King of Norway who actually decided that this vessel should have a computer. It was very expensive at that time. So again, this collaboration has continued over the last decades. And we now also work with more scientist institutions also outside Norway, like Woodsole, NOAA, Ifremer in France. The only reason we do that is to develop the best instrument that fits for these kind of purposes. So going on to the latest technology, the biggest thing we've seen the last year is going from narrowband to wideband. So I know EK60 is used in India on SaGHAA, for instance. The EK80 can do the same. So if you want to continue your time series, you can still do that. But it also has a wideband functionality. So we have a new electronics and new transceivers, but we use the existing transducer. So you could upgrade this without docking the vessel. And why is this so big? Well, it has two obvious benefits. It gives an increased resolution down to millimeters and long range at the same time. So this is very different. Instead of seeing a blob in a dense segregation, you get to see the single targets. And the other one is to get the increased frequency range. Instead of having 1, 2, 3, or 4 frequencies going ba 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 ba, you now have the whole sweep like woo. So this is taking you closer to the holy grail of identifying species based on acoustics. Just to summarize that, I'm going to show you a small video to see how this actually looks like when you have this increased resolution and you have the frequency response. So what you see here is a layer of mixed krill and fish, which normally would look like just a big blob. And this is now profiling over 100 meters. The single targets, the single krill and single small fishes are traced here. And you get the frequency response across the whole spectrum, which makes it easier to identify and differentiate fish and plankton, for instance. But this is something I could look at for a long time, but I don't have time for that now, so I'm going to continue. I have this video available if anybody wants it. The same. See if we can. And the second big thing is actually people are using now multi-beams that are designed in a scientific way. So these are multi-beams that can be calibrated, but they provide morphology. So they provide 3D, not just a single beam, but 3D. And what we're able to do now, and we are actually working with KM Digital to do this, we are now able to process the multi-beam data in real time and present it as the vessel moves along. So let's say you're looking to do adaptive sampling, you want to look for some krill aggregation. This would be a very good way to do that. You look at this and then you stop and you inspect what you want to see. Another good thing with this is that you can actually stop, play around, inspect the objects, and it will not stop the collection of the data. So this is purely a visualization software based on the scientific multi-beams. Then you have the sonars. I won't go into them, but you can think of them as underwater radars. So you can get very long range detection, 360 degrees around the vessel. It's used in Arctic waters for mammal detection. You can even map the extension and the depth of the icebergs. So these are available. Please come see me if you want to hear more about them. So this is one point. The research vessels will continue to be very important. These are all contracts that we have had over the last year or two Some of them will be mentioned from Rolls-Royce, but many of them are scientific icebreakers, and they all follow the same kind of instrumentation. They have the wideband system, the EK80, and the scientific sonars and the multibeams, and they use the omnidirectional sonar. So vessels are going to continue to be very important. But what we see, and there's been talk about moorings here, that the rationale for augmenting this data, the ship data, is big. So the vessels are limited in number and expensive to operate, so you cannot have your 1-year time series from a vessel. That's one thing. It's difficult to get single target if the aggregations are very dense, like a krill swarm, so you might want to lower the echo sounder down. And it's also difficult to read the deep scattering layers with higher frequencies, so the attenuation would avoid that. And there's so much more reasons to look at other platforms. So this is why, and this is coming to a conclusion here, we have developed not just the EK80, but we have developed a family of transceivers and transducers that are meant to go on all these kind of platforms. So moorings, surface vehicles, and underwater vehicles. So an echo sounder is not just an echo sounder anymore. In the end, I'll give you 2 examples of how they've been used. This first example is a fjord up in Alaska, where NOAA have used these echo sounders on the bottom for 3-4 months. And their idea is to map the whole spawning season of this walleye pollock, instead of just having 1-week survey. They've been arguing with the fishermen if they actually captured the peak of the spawning. So they've deployed it over 4 months, and they've had daily updates, and in the end they could get the total biomass of this spawning aggregation. This would be very similar with the krill aggregation. And in the end, we've also seen many starting to probe the ocean. So you can, this is an autonomous version of the echo sounder, just mounted on a CTD and lowered down through the aggregation. So when you get closer to the animal, you improve your resolution. And again, I'll show you the video. This is how they inspect the deep scattering aggregations. That was what I planned to show. Thank you.